In the 21st century, the ways and hows of getting from here to there, to visit, to work, to do commerce, they're many, varied, and complex. And so are the methods we rely upon to create the energy and power we need and use in our modern world. But there was a time, and not all that long ago really, when things were different. When, in the developing frontiers of America, pioneers needing transportation means and power sought out and relied upon a very special part of our natural landscape, the rivers. Large rivers were transportation corridors. All rivers, big and small, meant power. And in our part of Minnesota, power meant power for the milling industry. John North took advantage of the natural power in the Cannon River to start his businesses, to start his town, our town, Northfield. Now, in our fast-paced modern world today, this early relationship with the Cannon River may seem quaint, curiously historical, outdated. And yet the fact remains that we in Northfield continue to have a relationship with the river that is like the two sides of a coin. And perhaps today that relationship is more important than ever.
Oh, Cannon River, you're a friend of mine. Oh, Cannon River, flow on through time. When you were younger, your waters flowed clear and free, carrying all our songs and stories out to the sea.
Perhaps too often we only view our local past from the standpoint of when our town, Northfield, actually began. But the early white settlers were not the first people to live here on and around the Cannon River. There were the native people. Now, while it might be nice to believe they lived in well-ordered villages along the river when North arrived here, unfortunately, for a couple of reasons, very little is known about the native people who inhabited this area.
Two of the bands were in this area, the Wapakute, who are also known as the Shooters in the Leaves, and then the Wahpeton, who lived a little bit more to the west of us here over in the Jordan area. So they were in this area, and we don't have a lot of good ethnographic accounts of them because there wasn't a lot of need for early explorers to come into this part of Minnesota. They pretty much stuck to the big river systems. So when John North came here, you've got to remember when Northfield was founded in the mid-1850s, the Indian treaties had already been signed and the Indians were supposed to leave and go to their reservations on the upper Minnesota River. So they still have camps in this area and everything, but they are being resettled by the U.S. government.
One interesting note concerning the native people and the Cannon River is that the first white explorers in this area, most of whom were French, because of the activity of native people they saw on the Cannon River in their canoes, named it the River of Canoes. At some point, however, this name was altered.
What the French called it was the River of Canoes, from what they'd seen over in the Red Wing area where it comes in. And of course that got mistranslated on a map to turn into the Cannon River. Canoe became cannon, and that's how we have the Cannon River today. It has nothing to do with cannons, it had everything to do with canoes.
Now, for guys like John North back in the 1850s, they had a pretty singular notion of what rivers were for, and it wasn't about canoes. Business and commerce were the name of the game for them, and to make that happen, they needed power.
Northfield was chosen at its river location because it was a nice place to build a dam. Early land surveyors in Minnesota, when they came through, that's what they noted on their land survey notes. Constriction in the river, rapids, good place for a dam. Because they're looking for water power. That's going to be the heart of your city. And same happened in Minneapolis and St. Paul. St. Paul is the head of river transportation. Minneapolis settlement jumped from St. Paul to Minneapolis because St. Anthony Falls was there. It was a good place to put a dam. So North came here to build a dam, to build his sawmill, and then a little bit later to build his grist mill here.
River power was actually short-lived in these parts, soon to be replaced by steam power in the late 1870s. Nevertheless, the power provided by the Cannon River in about a 25-year period spawned a Silicon Valley of its times right here.
The Cannon River and the Middle Cannon River in general became a center of innovation. The mills at Dundas and Northfield and Faribault were the innovators of flour technology in Minnesota in the 1860s. The Minneapolis millers came down here, literally sent industrial spies into these mills to figure out how were the Cannon millers grinding such good flour. What were they doing that was right? And they actually eventually not only stole the secrets, but stole the people. They took the millers from Hastings and down in Faribault. They took some of those people, brought them in. The Washburns brought them into their big mill in Minneapolis, and that's where they developed the technology of what was known as the Middlings purifier, which made Minnesota flour in general just take off and become world-renowned flour. So it really is a river of history.
As the 19th century drew to a close, the mills declined, and the river lost its commercial value. But Northfield had also become an established town, and its relationship with its river, a river of many moods it seems, changed. As romantic as these scenes may be to some of us, perhaps evoking images of a simpler, slower-paced time, there is also an unseemly side to all this. Late in the 19th century, one unpleasant reality began to emerge about the relationship people all over America had with their rivers. They had become sewers. And early in the 20th century, even as the understanding and awareness grew of how infectious diseases were spread, the need to alter this was not without controversy. And even here in Northfield, if you can imagine such a thing. This flyer was printed apparently by a group of citizens opposed to building an early sewage system here. They seemed to think it was a waste of good public money. And besides, any pollution problems Northfield might have were due to the carelessness of other communities. Now, laugh as you may, this latter point they're making does at least prompt the need to consider seeing Northfield and its relationship to its river from an expanded point of view, of exploring the notion of community from what's going on outside of just my backyard or yours, and from just inside our corporate borders. Because when we live on a river like the Cannon, our community is much bigger than we may realize. The Cannon River begins here at Shields Lake in western Rice County. It flows west into neighboring Le Sueur County, then makes a 180-degree turn to come back into Rice County and continue its journey through two large lakes. At Faribault, Minnesota, it is joined by its largest tributary, the Straight River. The Cannon River continues northeastward to Northfield. Past Northfield, it heads through hill country and eventually empties into the Mississippi River in a very interesting marsh arrangement just north of Red Wing, Minnesota. From Faribault to the Mississippi, it is one of 6 designated Minnesota wild and scenic rivers. Throughout its journey to the Mississippi, the Cannon River receives water from a variety of sources, originating on land in a total of 9 counties, which collectively are all part of a distinct area known as a watershed.
Geographically speaking, a watershed is an area of land that drains to a common body of water. That body of water might be a river, a stream, or a lake, or even a small wetland, but it's an area where all the water that runs off the land goes to a common body of water.
The Cannon River's watershed drains 1,400 square miles. It is complex, draining the many lakes that make up western Rice County. It drains a very large agricultural area of southeastern Minnesota. its northernmost parts drain land on the fringes of the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. And the remote high hill and deep valley country east of Northfield contribute their water to it. The watershed also contains many towns such as our town, Northfield, which means that people living in those towns need to consider
that the water does run from their individual little piece of property, whether that's a lot or whether it's 5 acres or whether it's 150 acres. The water from their piece of property runs towards the Cannon River and eventually down into the Mississippi and beyond. So I think even though it's a much smaller area and compared land use wise, people in town, they probably have a greater impact per acreage than agriculture does because it's such an intense use.
All of this suggests both responsibilities and opportunities. Both are related to the wider community to which we belong, the watershed. We are responsible for caring for our part of the watershed. But this also provides an opportunity for our river to be viewed in a new way as a very important asset, both economically and socially. So in the year 2001, far away from its heyday as a source of power for commerce and business, and for the better, no longer an ignored dumping ground for our wastes, and having the recognition that it is a vital link to a bigger community, the watershed, what's next for our river and our town? What will the next dance be in our long-standing relationship?
I think the river is a uniting element, truly, because we are working toward now restoring some lost vitality to the west side business area downtown. It's a uniting element in the sense that we have parkland on both sides of the river, and the community sees the river as, in some respects, kind of the defining feature of Northfield. We don't have a mountain, we don't have a lake, we have a river, and much of the visual symbolism about Northfield has to do with the dam and the river and the river walls and the river walk. That's a great feature for us to have, and I think it's something that we can all identify with as we work toward developing the community. The redevelopment project that's being proposed for the west side of the river north of 2nd Street includes an extension of the Riverwalk. As an integral part of that development, it will be mixed use plus a park that will be dedicated to the veterans of all the wars that Northfielders have been involved in. There's also a hope that at some point in the relatively near future, as that project goes forward, that the Riverwalk can be extended a similar 2 blocks north on the east side of the river. I think other aspects of the amenity of the river are as you extend out to the north and south along the river, the parkland that the city has been able to acquire, especially to the south upstream, Seckler Park being an example of that, the possibilities for further extensions upriver toward Dundas, I think, are really important. As we go downstream, the Carlton Arboretum has been become a major community amenity as well as a feature for the college. The Milltowns Trail system, I think, is potentially very important to Northfield because it will be one element that will enhance the attention that is drawn to Northfield as part of that system. And the trail, in a very real sense, is here and is coming this way because of the river. As we talk about Mankato to Red Wing, we are really talking about a trail system that essentially follows the Cannon River basin.
Speaking of the basin or watershed, what about Northfield's role in it as part of the larger community it represents?
We have a responsibility to be good stewards to the river, to the other communities that are around us. And I think the investments that we make in our wastewater treatment plants are the primary way that we express that responsibility. I think the larger responsibility that we have to the environment, to this watershed, is one of controlling our growth in the community in ways that will be compact, in ways that will preserve the natural features that we have, control runoff, contribute generally to preserving those key features such as the edge of the river, so that it is both visually and environmentally preserved and enhanced.
Amenity. That has a nice ring to it. Not a bad job to have, really. Kind of like a well-deserved reward after many years of hard work and service to the community. It certainly fits the Cannon River. Would such a role have even crossed the minds of John North and his associates who saw the river as a power source for business and commerce? Probably not. On the other hand, though, you have to wonder if every once in a while they might have just stood quietly by the flowing water to think, reflect, maybe to just listen.
Oh, Cannon River, you're a friend of mine. Oh, Cannon River, flow on through time. But if we held you in our hearts, could you once again flow free and carry all our songs and stories out to the sea? And maybe bring healing to you and me.
One of the great characteristics of our community is, in fact, the river. It does more than just flow by. It is kind of like a main artery, and that artery is being fed by all kinds of land and creeks, and I guess watershed's the correct term, that kind of brings a whole area together. Like Northfield, like the city of Northfield, is part of a larger system of townships and counties and neighbors of all sorts. It's more than just the city proper of Northfield, just like the Cannon River is more than just Northfield. It belongs to a larger system. And I think that brings a spirit of cooperation and meaning, how we need to be sensitive to our neighbors, whether they be farm neighbors or neighboring communities. We're all part of a larger system. And I think the fact that the watershed knows that so clearly, it brings a special meaning to our community oneness.
What is the state of the Cannon River watershed today?
The Cannon is impaired. Several stretches of the Cannon, several tributaries are impaired, meaning a lot of the surface water in this basin doesn't meet certain standards for different water quality parameters. So in short, I would say the Cannon is an impaired watershed, and it's on the poor side of the scale.
How does that affect people in Northfield?
Well, it affects people in Northfield in part. Just you can look behind us and see the Cannon. What it looks like, it's often brown or green, you know, as opposed to other surface waters in other parts of the state and other parts of the country that are of better quality. So you could say that it affects our aesthetic experience here in Northfield. I think that you can imagine people would really enjoy the Cannon more if it were not known as quote unquote a dirty river, or if it were running really clearly, you know, a nice clear river through town.
The river is in my mind, is an underutilized asset for our community. We need to focus on the positive things that we have going and the things that are unique to Northfield. And the river certainly is, one of those, if not the single most important. Other communities have used the river setting much more to their advantage than Northfield, and I think it's going to be a challenge and an opportunity to use that resource in a more productive and a beneficial way to the whole, for everyone. Whether that be restaurants along the river or walkways or bicycle paths, it's just a great attribute to our community, and we just need to use it better. And quite frankly, I think we need to be better disciplined, use it in a more disciplined way. Whether that be taking better care of the banks, making more public access, providing more benches, all kinds of things. But we've got a real big asset here, and we need to really focus on it, I think.
I think that cities like Northfield and like all the cities in this watershed and cities abroad in Minnesota really need to move forward with their ordinances. They really need to take some of these kind of conventional ordinances and boilerplate stuff and get it out of there and get some forward-thinking language in there to encourage development, because we're developing at such a rapid rate. Encourage development that's a little bit friendlier to surface waters, in this case the Cannon River and its tributaries. The technology's there. It's not an economic hurdle because it's pretty much the same cost as a standard conventional, say, parking lot, for example, or stormwater treatment. But it's not being done. And we kind of need to break those molds. And I think ordinances and maybe some incentives from municipalities can really encourage that. The dam here, of course, serves no functional purpose, really. On one side, there's a historic and kind of a nostalgic tie to the dam for a lot of people. On the other side of the argument is, restoring the river to its natural flow would allow for fish passage, would also allow for a lot better kind of through traffic as far as canoe and kayak goes. You think about it, you don't see too many people canoeing through Northfield just because it's such an obstruction. They have to get out in Portage. So I think inevitably we will be faced with that.
What do you think is going to happen here when this comes up?
Well, I think that a lot of people are going to say, let's save the dam, and I can understand that. I can fully admit that I enjoy viewing the dam. I like to come to that point in the city and see the water cascading, and I know that it's been there for a long time. What I think will happen, though, is that the people, will eventually see. You can kind of compare it to some of the older buildings at St. Olaf College going down. I mean, when Itterboe Hall went down, a lot of people were upset. It's a historic building, a lot of emotional attachment, but it's just something that you have to say, well, I'm going to put my attachment aside, for the betterment of the community and for future generations, because, maybe the next generation, our children, will have an attachment to the free-flowing river through Northfield, So I like to think that Northfield will be forward-thinking and say, it's an interesting piece of our history, but let's remove it and let's get on with it.